The morning sun streamed through the windows of the small dance studio as Rosa Martinez adjusted her ballet shoes for the third time. She had been teaching here for 2 years now, and every single day still felt like a gift. The sound of children's laughter echoed from the hallway as they waited for their afternoon class to begin. Rosa was 24 years old and had dreams bigger than the cramped studio space could hold. She wanted to dance on the grand stages of the world, to feel the bright lights warming her face as hundreds of people watched her perform. But for now, she was content teaching 8 little girls who looked at her like she was the most important person in their world. "Miss Rosa, can you show us that spinning move again?" asked little Anna, her eyes wide with excitement. Rosa smiled and demonstrated the pirouette, her body moving with the natural grace that had taken years to develop. The children tried to copy her movements, some wobbling and giggling when they lost their balance. After class, Rosa packed her bags slowly. She had been working extra hours lately, taking on private lessons and weekend workshops. Her small apartment rent was due soon, and she needed every penny she could earn. Dancing was her passion, but it was also her only source of income. The rain started falling just as she stepped outside. Rosa pulled her jacket tighter and quickened her pace toward the bus stop. She had been invited to audition for the city's main dance company next month, and she needed to get home to practice. This could be her big break, the chance she had been waiting for since. She was a little girl dreaming of becoming a professional dancer. The streets were getting more slippery as the rain got heavier. Elsa checked her phone for the time and realized she was running late. Her roommate had made dinner and she had promised to be home by 7. She picked up her pace, her dance bag bouncing against her side with each step. At the intersection near her apartment building, Rosa waited for the light to change. The red hand glowed in the evening darkness, and she tapped her foot impatiently. Around her, other people hunched under umbrellas and hurried past, everyone eager to get out of the sudden downpour. The light turned green, and Rosa stepped into the crosswalk. She was thinking about tomorrow's rehearsal schedule when she heard the sound of squealing brakes behind her. Time seemed to slow down as she turned to see a car sliding on the wet pavement, its headlights growing bigger and brighter as it came toward her. She tried to jump out of the way, but there wasn't enough time. The impact sent her flying through the air, her dance bag scattering its contents across the wet asphalt. Her ballet shoes landed several feet away, one of them still tied perfectly, as if waiting for her to slip it back on and continue dancing. Rosa hit the ground hard, her head spinning from the shock. She tried to move, but something was terribly wrong. She could feel the rain soaking through her clothes, mixing with something warm that she realized was her own blood. The sound of the car engine was still running somewhere nearby, and she could hear people shouting, but their voices seemed to come from very far away. Her right leg was trapped under the twisted metal of the car's front bumper. She couldn't feel it anymore, which seemed strange because she could see it was clearly hurt. The sight made her feel sick, and she closed her eyes, hoping that when she opened them again, this would all be a bad dream. "Stay with me, stay awake," a voice said close to her ear. Rosa opened her eyes to see a woman kneeling beside her, pressing something soft against her forehead. "The ambulance is coming, you're going to be okay." But Rosa wasn't sure she believed that. She tried to wiggle her toes the way she always did before a performance to make sure her feet were ready to dance. Nothing happened. She tried again, concentrating as hard as she could, but her foot wouldn't respond. Panic started to rise in her chest. "My leg," she whispered to the woman helping her. "I can't feel my leg." "Don't worry about that right now," the woman said gently. "Just focus on staying awake for me." The ambulance arrived with sirens wailing and lights flashing red and blue across the wet street. Rosa watched as the paramedics worked quickly, their hands moving with practiced efficiency. They were talking to each other using words she didn't understand, medical terms that sounded serious and frightening. As they lifted her onto the stretcher, Rosa caught sight of her ballet shoes again, still lying on the pavement where they had fallen. She wanted to ask someone to pick them up, to bring them with her to the hospital, but the words wouldn't come out. Those shoes had been with her through countless hours of practice, through good performances and bad ones, through the joy of teaching children and the hope of bigger dreams, the ambulance doors closed with a sharp click, and Rosa felt the vehicle begin to move. Through the small window, she could see the dance studio where she had been just an hour ago, where her students would be waiting for her tomorrow. She wondered if she would ever see that place again, if she would ever be able to show little Anna how to do a perfect pirouette, the paramedic sitting beside her was checking her pulse and asking her questions she couldn't quite focus on. Her name, her age, did she have any allergies? Rosa answered as best she could, but her mind kept drifting back to her leg, to the fact that she still couldn't feel anything below her knee. Am I going to be able to dance again? She asked the paramedic, her voice barely above a whisper. The man looked at her with kind eyes, but didn't answer right away. Let's just focus on getting you to the hospital first, he said finally. The doctors will take good care of you. But Rosa already knew, deep in her heart, that everything was about to change. The dreams she had carried since childhood, the audition she had been preparing for, the life she had been building one dance lesson at a time, all of it was slipping away as surely as the rain was washing her blood from the street, where she had fallen. The last thing she remembered before the pain medication took effect was the sound of her mother's voice on the paramedic's phone, crying and asking if her daughter was going to be okay. Rosa wanted to tell her yes, that everything would be fine, but the words got lost somewhere between her heart and her mouth. When she woke up 3 days later in the hospital, the first thing she noticed was how quiet everything was. No music, no sound of children laughing, no rhythm of feet moving across a dance floor, just the steady beeping of machines and the soft footsteps of nurses in the hallway. The second thing she noticed was the shape of her body under the white hospital blanket. Something was missing, something that had been there her whole life. She didn't need to pull back the covers to know that her dancing days were over. She could feel it in the emptiness, in the way the blanket fell flat where her right leg should have been. Rosa turned her face toward the wall and closed her eyes, wishing she could go back to sleep and never wake up again. The first week back home from the hospital felt like living in someone else's life. Rosa's small apartment, which had always felt cozy and welcoming, now seemed like a prison. The walls were covered with pictures of her dancing, awards from competitions, and drawings that her students had made for her. Every single item felt like a cruel reminder of what she had lost. Her mother. Carmen had moved in temporarily to help take care of her. Carmen was a strong woman who had raised Rosa alone after her father left when she was just 5 years old. She had worked 2 jobs to pay for Rosa's dance lessons, believing in her daughter's dreams even when money was tight. Carmen tried to stay positive, but Rosa could see the worry lines deepening around her mother's eyes. Mia, you need to eat something, Carmen said every morning, bringing a plate of Rosa's favorite breakfast. But Rosa would just turn away, pulling the blanket over her head. Food had no taste anymore. Nothing seemed to matter. The physical therapy sessions were the worst part of her week. A cheerful therapist named Linda would come to the apartment twice a week, bringing exercises and equipment that Rosa was supposed to use. Linda always smiled too much and spoke in an overly bright voice that made Rosa want to scream. We're going to start with some simple upper body movements today, Linda would say, unpacking her bag with practiced efficiency. Building strength in your arms and core will help you adapt to using mobility aids. Rosa hated those words, mobility aids. It sounded so clinical, so final. She wasn't a person anymore. She was a patient with mobility aids. The crutches Linda brought sat in the corner of her room, untouched. Rosa had tried using them once, making it 3 painful steps before her arms gave out and she collapsed back onto her bed, exhausted and humiliated. The prosthetic leg arrived 6 weeks after the accident. Rosa remembered the day clearly because it was the same day she received a letter from the dance company where she had been planning to audition. They expressed their sympathy and wished her well in her recovery. The letter was kind, but Rosa could read between the lines. There would be no audition. There would be no place for her in their world. The prosthetic was a basic model, the kind the insurance company covered for people who just needed to get around. It was nothing like the advanced artificial limbs she had seen in movies. It was heavy, uncomfortable, and made her feel like she was wearing a piece of furniture instead of a body part. "It takes time to adjust," the technician explained as he fitted the device. "Most people need several weeks to feel comfortable walking with their new prosthetic." Rosa nodded and smiled politely, but inside she was screaming. This wasn't her leg. This cold, hard piece of metal and plastic could never replace what she had lost. When the technician left, Rosa stared at the prosthetic leaning against her dresser. It looked like it belonged to someone else, someone who had given up on ever being whole again. Days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months. Rosa's savings account grew smaller with each passing week. The hospital bills seemed endless, and without her teaching income, money was becoming a serious problem. Carmen picked up extra shifts at the restaurant where she worked, but Rosa could see how tired her mother was getting. The dance studio called several times in the first month. The owner, Mrs. Rodriguez, was understanding and kind. She kept Rosa's job open as long as she could, hoping that Rosa would find a way to come back. But eventually she had to hire someone else to teach Rosa's classes. The children needed consistency, and Rosa couldn't give them that anymore. "Little Lena asks about you every day," Mrs. Rodriguez told Carmen during one of her visits. "She keeps practicing that spin you taught her, hoping you'll come back to see how much she's improved." Rosa overheard this conversation from her bedroom. It broke something inside her that she didn't know could break any further. Anna was just 8 years old, full of dreams and possibilities. She deserved a teacher who could show her how to reach for the stars. It's not someone who couldn't even get out of bed. The worst part wasn't the physical pain or the financial stress. It was the silence. Rosa's apartment had always been filled with music. She would practice for hours, play her favorite songs while getting ready in the morning, and hum melodies while cooking dinner. Now the silence was so complete it felt like a living thing, pressing down on her chest and making it hard to breathe. Friends tried to visit, but Rosa stopped answering the door. She could hear them knocking, calling her name, leaving messages on her phone. They meant well, but she couldn't bear to see the pity in their eyes. She didn't want to hear them struggle to find the right words, to watch them try to act like everything was normal when clearly nothing would ever be normal again. Sleep became her escape, but even that was complicated. She would wake up in the middle of the night, forgetting for just a moment what had happened. She would try to get up to go to the bathroom, expecting both legs to carry her, only to be reminded all over again of her new reality. Those moments of forgetting followed by remembering were almost worse than the constant awareness of her loss. The prosthetic leg gathered dust in the corner of her room. Rosa had tried it on exactly once, 3 weeks after it arrived. She had managed to take 5 steps before the pain and the strange, unnatural feeling of it made her sick to her stomach. She had ripped it off and thrown it across the room, where it had stayed ever since. Carmen would sometimes pick it up and dust it off, placing it carefully by Rosa's bed. She never said anything about it, but Rosa knew what her mother was thinking. The prosthetic represented hope, possibility, a chance at getting some kind of life back. But Rosa couldn't see it that way. To her, it was just another reminder of what she had lost. The days blended together in a haze of pain medication and daytime television. Rosa would lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about all the things she would never do again. She would never feel the rush of performing on stage, never experience the joy of nailing a difficult routine, never see the proud smile on a student's face when they finally mastered a new move. Sometimes, late at night when Carmen was asleep, Rosa would allow herself to cry. She would sob quietly into her pillow, mourning not just her leg, but the person she used to be, the confident, hopeful, determined woman who had believed that hard work and passion could overcome any obstacle. That woman was gone, and Rosa didn't know who she was supposed to be without her. Carmen had been patient for 6 months, but Rosa could see that her mother was reaching her breaking point. The woman who had always been so strong was starting to look fragile, worn down by months of watching her daughter waste away. It was Carmen who finally made the decision that changed everything. "Rosa, you're coming with me today," Carmen announced one Tuesday morning, pulling back the curtains to let sunlight flood the dark bedroom. "There's a support group meeting at the community center, and we're going." Rosa pulled the blanket over her head. "I'm not going anywhere, especially not to sit in a circle with a bunch of strangers talking about their problems." Your problems, Carmen corrected firmly. And you are going. I've watched you disappear for 6 months and I can't do it anymore. Your father left us when things got hard, but I won't let you leave me too. The pain in her mother's voice was something Rosa had never heard before. Carmen had always been the rock, the one who held everything together. Yet hearing her sound so broken made Rosa realize how selfish she had been. She wasn't the only one suffering from this accident. An hour later, Rosa found herself in the passenger seat of Carmen's old car, heading toward the community center. She had reluctantly put on the prosthetic leg, though walking even the short distance from the car to the building left her exhausted and frustrated. The artificial limb felt heavy and foreign, like she was dragging a piece of dead weight behind her. The meeting was held in a small room with folding chairs arranged in a circle. About 12 people were already there when Rosa and Carmen arrived. Rosa had expected to see a room full of sad, defeated people, but instead, she was surprised by the variety of ages and backgrounds represented. There was an elderly man with one arm who was laughing at something his wife had just whispered to him. A teenage girl with 2 prosthetic legs was showing another member photos on her phone. A middle-aged woman with a walker was helping set up coffee and cookies in the corner. These people didn't look like victims. They looked like regular people, living regular lives. "Welcome, everyone," said a woman with gray hair and kind eyes. "I see we have some new faces today. I'm Dr. Patricia Webb, and I coordinate these meetings. Would our newcomers like to introduce themselves?" Rosa shook her head quickly, but Carmen gently nudged her forward. "Oh, this is my daughter, Rosa," Carmen said. She's been having a hard time adjusting." Before anyone could respond, the door opened and a man walked in, moving with surprising ease despite the obvious prosthetic leg visible below his rolled-up jeans. He was probably in his 30s, with sun-weathered skin and the kind of confident walk that Rosa remembered having once upon a time. "Hey, sorry I'm late," he said, settling into an empty chair across from Rosa. "I just got back from a medical mission in Guatemala, and my flight was delayed." Dr. Webb smiled. "Everyone, this is Dr. Benjamin Torres. He's a volunteer medic who works with various relief organizations around the world. Ben, we were just doing introductions." Ben looked around the circle, his gaze settling on Rosa. "I'm Ben," he said simply. "I lost my leg in a bombing while working in Afghanistan 3 years ago. I was angry about it for a long time, but I eventually figured out that being angry wasn't going to grow my leg back." Something about the way he said it, matter-of-factly and without self-pity, made Rosa pay attention in a way she hadn't expected to. "The thing is," Ben continued, "I thought my life was over. I was a medic, someone who needed to be able to move quickly to get to patients in difficult places. I couldn't imagine how I could continue doing the work I loved with only one leg." He leaned forward slightly, his eyes still on Rosa, but I was wrong. I've been to more places and helped more people in the last 3 years than I did in the 5 years before my injury. Sometimes losing something forces you to discover what you're really capable of. After the meeting, Rosa lingered in the parking lot while Carmen chatted with some of the other family members. She was struggling to adjust the prosthetic, which had started to chafe during the hour they had been sitting. "Need some help with that?" Ben asked, approaching her with a small toolkit in his hand. Rosa looked up embarrassed. "I can't seem to get it right. It always hurts, and I can barely walk 10 steps without feeling like I'm going to fall over." "That's because it's not fitted properly," Ben said, examining the connection between the prosthetic and her leg. "And it's a pretty basic model. There are much better options available, but insurance companies usually start with the cheapest ones." He made a few adjustments, and Rosa was surprised to feel an immediate difference. The prosthetic felt more secure, less likely to slip or twist. "How do you make it look so easy?" Rosa asked, watching as Ben moved with natural grace despite his artificial leg. "Practice," he said simply, "and the right equipment. But mostly, I had to change how I thought about it. This isn't a replacement for my leg. It's a tool that allows me to do the things I want to do." Ben pulled out his phone and showed Rosa a series of photos. There he was, climbing rocky terrain, in some remote location, treating patients in a makeshift clinic, even dancing at what looked like a wedding celebration. "I won't lie to you," he said, scrolling through the images. "It was hard at first, really hard. Spent months feeling sorry for myself, thinking my life was over. But eventually, I realized that I had two choices. I could let this define me as a victim, or I could figure out how to use it as a strength. A strength? Rosa asked skeptically. How can missing a leg be a strength? Ben smiled. Because it taught me things about myself that I never would have learned otherwise. It showed me that I'm tougher than I thought, more adaptable than I imagined. And it gave me a different perspective on what real problems look like. He showed her a photo of himself with a group of children in what looked like a refugee camp. These kids have been through things that would break most adults, but they still find reasons to smile every day. Being around people like that changes you. It makes you realize that resilience isn't about avoiding hardship. It's about finding ways to thrive despite it. As they talked, Rosa found herself opening up in ways she hadn't with anyone since the accident. Ben didn't offer empty platitudes or try to minimize her pain. Instead, he listened and shared his own experiences with honest directness. I'm not going to tell you that everything happens for a reason, he said as they prepared to leave.
That's
Garbage. And anyone who says that to you probably hasn't been through anything really difficult. But I will tell you that you get to choose what this means for your life. Before getting into his car, Ben handed Rosa a business card. I'm organizing a clinic next month for people who want to learn more about advanced prosthetics and adaptive sports. If you're interested, give me a call. Rosa looked at the card, then back at Ben. I used to be a dancer, she said quietly. I don't think I'll ever be able to do that again. Maybe not the same way you used to, Ben replied. Met dancers who lost limbs and found new ways to express themselves through movement. The question isn't whether you can dance again. The question is whether you want to badly enough to figure out how. On the drive home, Rosa was quieter than usual, but it was a different kind of quiet. For the first time in months, she wasn't thinking about what she had lost. She was thinking about what might still be possible. Rosa stared at Ben's business card for 3 days before she finally called him. Her hands were shaking as she dialed the number, and she almost hung up twice before he answered. I've been thinking about what you said, she told him. About the clinic for advanced prosthetics, I think I'd like to try. Ben's voice was warm and encouraging. I'm glad you called. The clinic is this Saturday at the rehabilitation center downtown. I'll pick you up at 9 and we can go together. That Saturday morning, Rosa woke up earlier than she had in months. She actually took a shower and put on real clothes instead of the pajamas she had been living in. Carmen watched with barely contained excitement as Rosa struggled to put on the prosthetic leg. But she didn't say anything, afraid of breaking the spell. The rehabilitation center was nothing like the sterile hospital where Rosa had spent those terrible first weeks. This place was bright and modern, with large windows and motivational posters on the walls. But what struck Rosa most was the sound of laughter coming from the main exercise room. Are you ready for this? Ben asked as they walked through the entrance. Rosa nodded, though she felt anything but ready. I think so. The first person they met was a prosthetist named Dr. Lisa Chang, who specialized in devices for athletes and active individuals. She examined Rosa's current prosthetic with a professional eye, taking measurements and asking questions about Rosa's daily activities. This is definitely not the right fit for you, Dr. Chang said, making notes on her tablet. You're young and active, or at least you were before the accident. This basic model is designed for elderly patients who just need to get around their house. She showed Rosa several different types of prosthetics, each one more advanced than the last. There were legs designed for running, others for dancing, and even specialized feet that could adapt to different types of terrain. The technology has come so far in the last few years, Dr. Chang explained. These newer models can actually learn and adapt to your walking style, have sensors that adjust to different surfaces and activities. Rosa watched in amazement as Dr. Chang demonstrated how the advanced prosthetics worked. The movements looked so natural, so fluid. For the first time since the accident, she felt a tiny spark of hope. Can I try one? Rosa asked hesitantly. Of course, it's what we're here for. The fitting process took over an hour. Dr. Chang had to make several adjustments to ensure the prosthetic fit perfectly. Rosa was surprised by how different it felt from her old one. This new leg was lighter, more responsive, and somehow felt more like a part of her body. "Now, let's see you walk," Dr. Chang said, guiding Rosa to a long hallway with parallel bars on either side. Rosa's first steps were wobbly and uncertain. She gripped the bars tightly, afraid of falling. But as she continued down the hallway, something amazing happened. The prosthetic began to feel more natural, more like her own leg. "This is incredible," Rosa breathed, turning around to walk back toward Ben and Dr. Chang. "You're a natural," Ben said, smiling. "Took me weeks to walk that smoothly." Over the next several weeks, Rosa returned to the rehabilitation center 3 times a week. Ben had introduced her to a physical therapist named Carlos, who specialized in helping amputees regain their mobility and confidence. Carlos was tough but patient. He pushed Rosa to try things she didn't think she could do, but he also knew when to back off and let her rest. Under his guidance, Rosa slowly began to rebuild not just her physical strength, but her mental resilience as well. "Balance is the key," Carlos would say during their sessions. "Your body needs to learn a new way to move, but your brain needs to trust that process." Exercises were hard and often frustrating. Rosa would spend entire sessions working on simple tasks like standing on one foot or walking upstairs. Sometimes she would leave the center in tears, exhausted and discouraged by how difficult everything had become, but Ben was always there, offering encouragement and sharing stories of his own struggles during recovery. He told her about the first time he tried to run with his prosthetic and fell flat on his face in front of a group of children. He showed her videos of other amputees who had gone on to achieve amazing things. "Look at this," he said one afternoon, showing Rosa a video on his phone. "This woman lost both legs in a car accident, and now she's a Paralympic swimmer. And this guy became a rock climber after losing his arm." Rosa watched the videos with growing interest. These people weren't just surviving, they were thriving. They had found ways to pursue their passions despite their disabilities, and some had even discovered new talents they never knew they had. The breakthrough came during her 8th week of training. Rosa was working on a balance exercise when Carlos suggested she try something different. "I know you used to dance," he said. "Show me some of the basic positions you remember." Rosa hesitated. She hadn't even thought about dancing since the accident. But something in Carlos's encouraging expression made her willing to try. She positioned herself carefully and attempted a simple ballet position called first position. Her feet turned out, her arms curved gracefully at her sides. For a moment, she felt like herself again. "Beautiful," Carlos said. "Now try second position." Rosa moved slowly, carefully, into the wider stance of second position. The prosthetic leg felt different from her natural leg, but it was stable and supportive. She could feel the muscle memory in her upper body, the way her arms naturally found their proper placement. "I can feel it," she whispered, almost afraid to say the words out loud. "I can actually feel like I'm dancing." Carlos smiled. "That's because you are dancing. It's different from before, but it's still dancing." Over the following weeks, Rosa began incorporating more dance movements into her physical therapy. She worked on turns, though they required a completely different technique now. She practiced balancing on one foot, building up the strength in her standing leg. She even attempted small jumps. Though those were still beyond her current ability, Ben watched her progress with obvious pride. "You're not just learning to walk again," he told her one day. "You're learning to move with purpose and grace. That's what dancing really is." Rosa began to see other amputees at the center, and she started to understand that each person's journey was unique. There was Miguel, who had lost his arm in a workplace accident and was learning to play guitar again. There was Jennifer, who had been born without her left hand and was training to become a chef. "Everyone finds their own way," Ben explained. "Some people want to get back to exactly what they were doing before. Others discover completely new passions. The important thing is to keep moving forward." As the weeks passed, Rosa found herself looking forward to her sessions at the center. She was sleeping better, eating more, and for the first time in months, she was thinking about the future instead of dwelling on the past. Carmen noticed the change too. "You're starting to look like my daughter again," she said one evening as they sat together watching television. Rosa smiled. "I'm starting to feel like myself again too." Different, but still me. The real test came when Ben invited Rosa to watch a performance by an adaptive dance troupe. The dancers were amazing, using their disabilities as part of their artistic expression. Rather than hiding them, "I want to do that," Rosa said, watching a woman with one arm perform a stunning solo piece. "I want to dance again," Ben grinned. "I was hoping you'd say that." 1 year after meeting Ben, Rosa stood in front of the mirror at a new dance studio, adjusting the colorful sleeve that covered her prosthetic leg. The sleeve was decorated with butterflies that her young students had helped her choose, each one representing transformation and new beginnings. Today was special. It was the opening day of her adaptive dance program, something she had been planning for months with the help of Ben and the rehabilitation center. Rosa had never imagined that losing her leg would lead her to this moment, but here she was, about to teach her first class for children with disabilities. "Miss Rosa, are you nervous?" asked 10-year-old Diego, who had been born with one arm. Shorter than the other, he was one of 5 students enrolled in the program, and his enthusiasm reminded Rosa so much of herself at that age. "A little bit," Rosa admitted, smiling at the boy, "but the good kind of nervous."
The kind that means...
"We're about to do something amazing." The other students gathered around as Rosa began the class. There was Lucia, who used a wheelchair after a spinal injury, and twins Alex and Sophia, who had both lost hearing but could feel the vibrations of the music through the specially designed floor. Each child brought their own challenges, but also their own unique way of moving and expressing themselves. "Dancing isn't about having perfect legs or arms," Rosa told the group as they formed a circle. "It's about using whatever body you have to tell a story, to share feelings, to create something beautiful." She demonstrated a simple movement, turning her prosthetic leg into part of the choreography rather than hiding it. The children watched, with fascination, not seeing a disability, but seeing a teacher who understood what it meant to be different. "Your turn," Rosa said, putting on music with a strong beat that the hearing-impaired twins could feel through their feet. What happened next took Rosa's breath away. Diego spun gracefully, using his shorter arm to create unique lines and shapes. Lucia moved her wheelchair with fluid precision, her upper body flowing like water. The twins moved in perfect synchronization, their bodies responding to the rhythm. They felt rather than heard. Ben watched from the doorway, having stopped by to see how the first class was going. He had been Rosa's biggest supporter throughout this journey, helping her navigate the paperwork to start the program and connecting her with other adaptive dance instructors around the country. "They're naturals," he whispered to Carmen, who had also come to watch her daughter's triumphant return to teaching. Carmen wiped tears from her eyes as she watched Rosa work with the children. This was the daughter she remembered, the passionate teacher who could inspire anyone to believe in themselves. But this Rosa was even stronger than before, tempered by hardship and made more compassionate by her own struggles. After class, Rosa sat with her students as they shared juice boxes and talked about their favorite parts of the lesson. Their excitement was infectious, and Rosa found herself laughing more than she had in years. "Miss Rosa," Lucia said, maneuvering her wheelchair closer, "my doctor said I might never dance again, but this doesn't feel like never to me." Rosa's heart swelled with emotion. "That's because there's no such thing as never when it comes to following your dreams. Sometimes we just have to find a different path to get there." Over the following months, the program grew. Word spread through the local hospitals and rehabilitation centers about the dance teacher who understood what her students were going through. More children enrolled, and Rosa had to hire an assistant instructor to help manage the growing classes. Ben introduced Rosa to other professionals who were doing similar work. She met a former soldier who taught rock climbing to amputees, a chef who ran cooking classes for people with visual impairments, and a musician who composed pieces specifically for performers with disabilities. "You're part of a movement," Ben told her during one of their weekly coffee meetings. "People are realizing that disability doesn't mean inability, it just means finding new ways to do the things you love." Rosa began speaking at conferences and rehabilitation centers, sharing her story and advocating for better support for people with disabilities. She talked about the importance of proper prosthetics, the need for adaptive programs in schools, and the power of finding purpose after trauma. I used to think my life ended in that crosswalk, she would tell audiences. But really, that's where my real life began. I just didn't know it at the time. The dance studio became more than just a place for classes. It became a community center, where families could connect, where children could see adults who looked like them succeeding and thriving. Rosa organized performances where her students could showcase their talents, proving to themselves and their families that they were capable of beautiful things. One of the most memorable performances featured Diego dancing a solo piece he had choreographed himself. As he moved across the stage, his different arm length became part of the artistic expression, creating shapes and movements that a typical dancer never could have achieved. "Look what I can do that other dancers can't," he said proudly after his performance. And Rosa knew she had succeeded in teaching him the most important lesson of all. Ben continued to be a part of Rosa's life. Though his medical missions took him around the world, whenever he returned, he would visit the studio and share stories of the people he had met and helped. His friendship had been the catalyst for Rosa's transformation, but now she was creating her own ripple effects in the lives of others. Carmen eventually moved back to her own apartment, confident that her daughter was not just surviving, but truly living again. She volunteered at the studio, helping with costumes and organizing fundraisers to keep the program accessible to families who couldn't afford the fees. "I'm proud of the woman you've become," Carmen told Rosa, one evening after a particularly successful performance. "You've taken something terrible and turned it into something beautiful." Rosa looked around the studio, watching families celebrate their children's achievements, seeing the joy and confidence on young faces that had once been filled with doubt and sadness. "I couldn't have done it without you," Rosa replied. "Without Ben and Dr. Chang and Carlos and all the people who refused to let me give up on myself." As the months turned into years, Rosa's program expanded to include adult classes and even a competitive team that traveled to adaptive dance competitions. She partnered with prosthetic companies to develop specialized legs for dancers, and she began training other instructors to start similar programs in their communities. But perhaps the most meaningful moment came when little Anna, Rosa's former student from before the accident, showed up at the studio. She was now 13 and had heard about Rosa's new program through Mrs. Rodriguez at the old dance studio.
"Yes,
"Miss Rosa," Anna said, hugging her former teacher tightly, "I never stopped practicing that spin you taught me. I kept hoping you would come back someday." Rosa felt tears streaming down her face as she watched Anna demonstrate the pirouette, now executed with the grace and skill of a much more advanced dancer. "I did come back," Rosa said, "just not in the way either of us expected." As the sun set through the studio windows, Rosa reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. Her leg was still gone, and some days were still hard. But her hope had not just returned. It had multiplied and spread to dozens of other people who now believed in their own possibilities. She had learned that sometimes the end of one dream becomes the beginning of something even more meaningful than you ever imagined.